afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Are we still all awake? Excellent. You all have your coffee. What a day it has been. Thank you, everyone, for your participation and your enlightening information. I would like to introduce the next panel. As Tim mentioned, my name is Nassia Skoulikariti. I am the chair for the IoT working group here at MEF and the founder of Apiro Data. And we're going to switch a little bit gears for the next session, where we've been talking about organizational and personal data. We're now going to talk about IoT and how that pertains to personal data and identity. So I would like to introduce my fellow panelists, Jimmy Jones, who is the head of security from Zaria, Chris Swan, engineer of Sign, and of course, Simon Bidcoat, director of OBS Medical.
All right, I'm going to swap.
Oh, you're there. This lines up with.
We'll do it this way. I said we'll switch things up, right? I did not lie. Thank you. All right, let's dive right in. And Jimmy, thank you. And Chris, thank you for supporting the session this afternoon. And could you tell us what your opinion is when it comes to IoT? And how does that pertain to the whole digital identity and privacy?
I think IoT's impacts on privacy really can't be overestimated. Bradley kicked us off this morning and he was going through everything, all the data that could be collected while we're surfing the internet and doing whatever we do on our devices, our phones and our laptops. Well, in 2025, it's anticipated that you'll interact with IoT every 18 seconds. So if you imagine that amount of data being collected by that amount of devices, it's exponential from where we are now. And that really does affect your privacy. And privacy is key to everything, because privacy is actually part of our evolution. We want privacy. We want to understand who we're talking to, because in millions of years ago, it was what protected us. It was what allowed us to survive. We wanted to know who we were talking to, and we wanted to hold back what we wanted from them, because otherwise, if we turn our back, maybe he's going to hit us on the head with a club. We don't want that. And we can see the impact when you start to lose that privacy, when it starts to be eroded, when we look at what's happened to social media over the last, 10, 15 years. You can see the impact of losing that privacy just on the devices we can actually turn off. I mean, none of us do, but we could turn off our phones, we could turn off our social media. Well, you can't turn off your smart car, your smart house, your smart street. That's never going to happen. So the actual impact that IoT brings on both privacy and identity, and to be able to protect those, I think it can never be overestimated.
Fantastic. Chris?
I think Jimmy's hit it there in terms of the scale of what we're facing here, that there's probably going to be an order of magnitude more things than there are people, and that each of us is going to be carrying them in them as cars and buildings, and that will be affecting our privacy. And it comes to me as a sort of very simple proposition, that it should be your thing, your data, that you can be in control of the data coming from the things in your ownership. And right now, the industry seems to agree that that's a good idea, and yet that's not how anything is actually working. All of the data is being squirted into cloud services and plundered for advertising and marketing and all kinds of other uses. And that is going to become increasingly problematic.
That's interesting what you say. You know, your data, it belongs to you. Your thing is your thing. What are some of the key challenges that we are facing when it comes to securing the things in the overall umbrella of the Internet of Things? Millions of devices being interconnected and getting connected every single day. So what are some of the challenges that we're facing? And I'm looking at you, Jimmy.
Oh, great. Well, it's actually 127 devices per second that are being added. So it's a huge number, like you say. And a lot of those are in very exposed positions, both physically and cyber. So protecting those really is hugely important. And we look to be able to drive a lot of that. Obviously, we're a cellular connectivity provider, so we use the SIM as a root of trust. It has all my information, so you can, when you're joining my network, and that's secured. MNOs do get hacked occasionally, but it's not from the SIM, it's normally from the back end or whatever it is. The SIM is particularly secure, so we use that as a root of trust. And that's why we partnered with the @Sign. We wanted to be able to create, basically at the beginning, just end-to-end encryption. We wanted to be able to mimic what happens to IoT Safe. IoT Safe is a fantastic GSMA initiative, but it does tie you into AWS Azure or GCP. So we didn't want to do that. We was looking to secure it and secure data in transit. What we saw when we started to work with the @Sign is there was more to it than that. I tell a story where when I first met the founders of the @Sign, I wanted just end-to-end encryption, and I had a discussion with them. I was happy, and then they carried on telling me what they did. And at one point, I've had 25 years in engineering at that point, I suddenly realized I either didn't understand how VPNs worked, or they did something different, and they've got 42 patents or something in 3 years. So it's very different. So when we were at Zaria, then we started to look at that and go, actually, there's a lot more to this. What can we do with it? And what we saw is the way that their platform is built means that you can hold control if you hold the keys. So what we look to do is exactly as Chris said, if you buy an IoT device, it should be your data. And the joining of the rivers, Michael's book that he does, he shows how with SSI you should be in that position where it's not all your data being released, but you've got to give some away and you've got to find that equilibrium. What we decided to do was using the SIM and using everything that's available there, use the unique @Sign ID and their platform to be able to say, if you bought that device, we will drive the keys into that SIM after you've bought it. And those private keys only exist there, and so you have full control. You can, if you own that device, you can say if that data gets shared. And if you, for instance, it was a medical device, we have say in the US, and the doctor you were using either becomes too expensive or gets struck off or something, you can change and send that data to another doctor, but because of the way their platform is built and because of the way the keys are held, the first doctor no longer is able to see what's going on. So you can move that into any situation you want, but the important thing is that it's secure and it's your control.
Great. So you mentioned medical devices and medical security, and that's a good segue to come to you, Simon, because it's becoming more and more important in the industry, especially around healthcare, and there's a lot of noise, healthcare and IoT, and there's quite a few significant initiatives around that. What is your opinion when it comes to securing all those medical devices?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very big problem. For us, our sort of previous kind of remit has been to basically produce software as a medical device to run in hospitals for patients who are also in hospitals. But more recently, there's kind of been a mantra of the hospital of the future is basically the home. And hospitals worldwide really are looking at kind of more and more initiatives to basically get patients home faster. With monitoring devices or whatever it may be, with patches, with wearables, all these other kind of things. And this creates a huge problem, really, because although medical device is quite forward-thinking in so much as people think, oh, we've got standards, we've got regulations, we've got all these other things, the reality is the one thing hospitals do not adopt is cloud computing. Pretty much by and large, if you go into, I've been into several data centers in US hospitals, and they rival small Amazon centers. You know, they invested millions in their own data centers during the EMR revolution. So that basically creates the issue of getting data from the patient's home into a secured network that is a hospital in a secure fashion. And that's challenging, as Jimmy says, VPNs are rubbish. So that, again, led us to basically our partnership with @Sign in so much as by using basically the kind of end-to-end identity and encryption that comes along with @Sign, we're basically able to send a patient home who has been walking around a hospital being monitored by this device with their data, go into our predictive analytics platform in the hospital. They can stand outside, they can get in a taxi, they can go home, and it all just magically works. But then at any point when that patient is basically disenfranchised with a hospital, as so often happens, especially in US healthcare, for instance, they can basically opt out and stop that data feed at any point. And that's much more kind of advantageous than the alternative, which is the kind of BTLE-based patches that use traditional mobile phones to communicate with Bluetooth and then spit that data up to GCS or Amazon or wherever it may be. So.
It's quite interesting what you said. They can opt out, but can also willingly turn it off.
Yep.
And I know you and I had a brief chat. We all had a brief chat earlier this week, and you shared some interesting stories, especially, you know, for the more elderly, where they are afraid of technology and voluntarily. I'll let you say the story. You say it much better than me.
We've kind of got two branches in IoT and patient monitoring. We've got the branch of basically BTLE devices, Bluetooth Low Energy, and these things are everywhere. 10 of these companies pop up every week, every month, or whatever it is, and 20 fail in the same time period because the technology is cheap, the battery life is good, and there's just startup after startup producing this type of technology. And the problem with that technology is that basically people go home along with, sometimes it's a mobile phone, more often than not, it's a magic box, a magic IoT box. And some companies are very, very, shall we say, kind of lackadaisical on what they send the patient home with. I've seen everything from cardboard boxes to, 3D printed cases to boxes that are basically brought from, Raspberry Pi shop and that sort of thing. And they go home with these devices, and typically kind of we're monitoring kind of elderly patients or whatnot, and they basically think the device is Alexa. They think it's listening to them, they think it's watching them, and all these other things. And compliance on these studies cost a lot of money, is a big thing. So if somebody's supposed to be taking a blood pressure measurement 4 times per day, we need them to take it 4 times a day. But what we find happening is people turn them off, they hide them. We've had one incident where the grandkid had come round and taken it to bits and made something new out of it. There's just all sorts of issues with basically little boxes, as we call them. So more recently, the industry is moving, thankfully, to kind of, I kind of tend to term it the Internet in things as opposed to the Internet of things, which is the patches and the wearables that actually contain the SIM, they contain the @ sign, they contain basically the destination for their data, and they just work. There's nothing separate. So if I turn that off, I know it's off. There's no ancillary component that goes along with that. And that's just been a massive boon. Unfortunately, there's still very few of those type of devices around. It's still quite new because the problem with that is it has an adverse effect on battery life. So, the patches that are BTLE can be worn for 12 hours, 36 hours, whatever it may be. But the moment you start putting LTE, 3G, 4G in them, the battery life, unfortunately, just goes through the floor. So I personally look forward to seeing that technology evolve more so we can get more Internet in things as opposed to Internet of things.
Well, we can talk about the terms, till the cows come home, as they say. And I always, make sure to tell everyone that the Internet of Things is misunderstood or not understood because it's an umbrella of things that fall underneath it. But anyhow, I'm digressing here. Let's get back into the subject. I'm a big believer of the future of healthcare that will be connected, remote, and in order to do that, it has to be secure. And with that, I would come to you, Chris, and can we truly secure the devices? What are some of the best practices that somebody can follow to secure a so-called IoT device?
So nothing can ever be perfectly secured. I think we have to kind of take that as a starting point. But we can do a lot better than we have been doing. So if we look at things like the Mirai botnet, that's where there was a worm took over a whole bunch of really badly constructed video cameras. And more generally, if we look at IoT things that we're buying as consumers, it tends to be hurriedly written software on top of inherently insecure operating systems. with very little thought given to field updatability, patching, firmware upgrades, and all of those sorts of things. And I think we can address each of those areas in turn. So we can give developers SDKs that make it easier to build secure applications quickly. We can choose environments that we're running things in, and we can also choose platforms, frameworks, and languages that are going to give us more secure software that we're running and the operating systems underneath them. And then we can make it much easier to manage the devices through their life cycle in a secure way. And one of the things we've focused on with our technology is secure remote admin. So not leaving a whole bunch of ports open, which a worm or something is going to be able to attack, but rather using the end-to-end encryption to coerce communications from the device on demand for the rightful people, so that things like configuration changes and firmware updates can be carried out when they need to be, but without leaving the device exposed, and also without requiring complex network configuration and management in order to achieve that.
Yeah, I think that's really key. I mean, the security thing is actually as well, I know we're at the identity event, but the security thing is very key to the identity, because what that security does, it gives you attestation. So the key of everything we've been talking about today, all of those LEIs and everything else we've been talking about, they have to be trusted. So that's the stage below. I see myself as maybe 3 levels down. So I'm just a connectivity guy. But what I can do is I know that I can take a eSIM, for instance. I can have that. I know that eSIM is going to be built in a certified factory. I know I can follow it all the way through the supply chain. I can push in Chris's unique identifier, or any identifier actually, LEIs. I can put that in the SIM. I can put in a key, and I know that that's safe till then. I can then, with EUICC, the new SIM technology, I can then create public-private keys remotely. So the first time it boots, I can get that to write a new key. So I'm completely sure that that device is there, and then you can put other safety nets in there as well. But once you have that attestation, you have that identity, then you know where you are, and everything that the guys have been talking about today then has something solid to build on. It's important then to be able to secure that, because, like I said, privacy and your personal data are 2 different things. So you want to be able to make sure the person you're talking to is the person you're talking to, or more importantly, in this device, in our case, is the device. We saw earlier that we were talking about a company's ID, and then we were talking about a person's ID, and then we're talking about an employee's ID. We need to take that all the way down to a device ID. Yeah. And we see that's one of the biggest plays we have with the at-sign is we hear a lot about, say, private 5G. Private 5G is normally because a factory wants to lock everything down. But at some point, that factory, there's going to be a lorry that picks up whatever that factory's made and takes it away. So it's now off of that island and it's away. What we're saying you can do is if you secure an application level and you've got all that underlying attestation, then when that lorry comes up, you can trust the logistics tracker, and you know that where it's gone, and using the at-sign technology, it can be secured no matter where it goes. So you've actually got an island, but you can actually have satellites over that, which are all captured under that same security umbrella. And coupled with the identity that's baked in, I think it really does bring a compelling story.
It's very true. Surely the security, especially for things, starts at the device itself. And within the industry, we talk about end-to-end security, and there is no such thing as end-to-end security. It's siloed security and siloed identity so far, right? Because you mentioned a few minutes ago that we spoke about the organizational identity, the individual identity, all the way to the employee, but we didn't speak yet, we didn't cover the things. And earlier this morning, there was a slide that was put up that said, who is an individual? And you could see underneath it all kinds of things, physical and non-physical. So the identification of the individual is changing, because our society is changing with everything being connected. So, Chris, can we truly put who owns the identity? Who owns the security? Is it the organization, meaning the people who manufacture, produce the secure layer, or is it the individual who buys whatever product they bought?
It depends, which is why any kind of solution in this space has to be federatable and allow for different identity concepts to be used as required in the different contexts that demand them. So there are definitely going to be device ownership contexts where the device is owned by a manufacturer or a distributor or a hospital. But then there's also going to be contexts where you wish the individual who's bought the device to then assume control over everything to do with that. And so the conversations we get involved in are about the whole variety of those contexts and the models that go with them. But also, this gets into namespaces. So, we run a public namespace, but then that namespace gets extended with different modifiers. But we've already, from the beginning, conceived of multiple parallel private namespaces that would be run alongside of it. And I'll go back to one of the most powerful comments from this morning, which is the key is the keys and being able to manage lots of key pairs. And at the heart of what we're doing here, in order to accomplish end-to-end encryption, you need to be able to deal with key pairs for everything and be able to know what they are, where they are, exchange that information in the right context-dependent paths, and get the public keys into the right place so that those secure conversations can actually take place.
Well, the consumer wants to feel like their data is safe. Also, if they're bringing a product into their home, their smart home environment, be it Alexa, be it whatever, Google Hub or another IoT device, smart bulbs for the lights, they want to feel that their things are secure.
It's not just consumers. It's a digital journey for everyone. We're all digital transformations, everybody's buzzword. But that's one of the other reasons we went with that technology, because it doesn't. Obviously, I would like everybody to use it on cellular. That would be fantastic. But it doesn't mean I'd sell loads of SIMs. But that's not necessary. You can put it on Wi-Fi. You can put it on a server somewhere in a data center. So it's agnostic to the way you join. So that's good for us. So I'll have this same conversation talking about the @sign to somebody who hasn't got a SIM, because that maybe everything is in a factory and everything's Wi-Fi, because I know at some point they will expand out. The world is we're all on that journey. The fact that they can cover your IT network, and then as you move forward, your OT or your IoT network comes under the same umbrella. It gives you that digital journey, and it gives you that consistency over all your security, which is really key. It also gives you that consistency about identity. We come back to that, is you can make sure that actually that guy who's using his laptop on Wi-Fi is the engineer, and he's allowed to touch that device that's using cellular to be able to connect up to the wherever it's connected. So you can do that point to point again, but it all comes down to the fact that you can attest that that person is who he is or she is, and that device is what it is, and those identities are baked in. So it's really, really important.
Simon, I haven't forgotten about you. I'll come back to you and get your opinion around, what are you guys doing to secure the data from your patients? And I mean, your customers, really. What are some of the initiatives that you're involved on and you see?
Yes, I mean, it's a big challenge for us, because predominantly, as sort of you guys were talking, data ownership's a big thing. And when you go into a hospital, unbeknown to you, you may be part of numerous clinical studies that all have got implied consent, and all your data, albeit anonymized, is basically being used by these research groups behind the scenes. And the amount of data that basically goes into those processes is just enormous. Sometimes it's obvious, do you consent to be in this study? Sometimes you don't, and so on. And basically ensuring that the patient still has some sort of visibility over that is a real key challenge. And basically for us, it's really consisted of the mixture of the hospital and the home, and in some cases even kind of rapid response. So we're looking now at kind of monitoring patients absolutely everywhere, because basically our technology really is there to predict when those patients deteriorate, and they can deteriorate absolutely anywhere. That's the whole point. And in some cases, basically, the patients sort of kind of say, well, how do I know that my data is safe? And the honest answer is it's very difficult. We can sit here and talk about all the technical details, but if I say, well, your data's end-to-end encrypted and it's provisioned on a SIM, and they sort of look at you completely blankly. And that's really where we kind of rely, to be honest, on the regulations and the regulatory bodies that are going behind this. But it takes them so long to catch up with things because you've got worldwide discrepancies between, HIPAA, GDPR, they're different, and so on. And, the medical device world is not slow, it's glacial. It just takes so long for anything to happen. And you've got the big kind of standards where you've got 3 or 4 years between the kind of major revisions. And that means we have to really kind of make sure that basically we lay out exactly what the devices do, what parameters they're monitoring, what patient identifiable information that we're storing on that patient. And then kind of quite critically, we have to associate the patient, or rather the patient's data, with the device, not the patient. So we basically, when we kind of record data at home, we don't say, well, this is Simon's data. We don't store anything of that sort on the little box or whatever it is that's in the patient home. We just say that this is the serial number of this device. And then we basically associate that serial number with the patient, the other end, where we've got much more security over that, and where we can basically provide much more visibility. And if we get, we've even had freedom of information requests and that sort of thing, where people say, well, I want to know what my data is being used for. But the fact of the matter is basically, for most of our space, it's under the hospital umbrella. And they've got their own privacy laws that basically eclipse anything that we kind of talk about today.
Great. Michael, you had a question.
Yeah, I've got one quick question, and then we're going to wrap into the last couple panels. So we've talked a lot about different IDs today, and you were discussing attestation and all that. So this is generally for Jimmy and Chris. Can you align the idea of an @sign ID versus an LEI versus a VLEI? Are they competing? Do they work together? I think that could get really confusing for people as we're starting to throw out all these different IDs. And how do we start rationalizing this for our people?
I think that's a question for you, Chris.
So an @sign is just a plain text string. And so it could even be an LEI. However, I think in most common use cases, there would be 1 degree at least of indirection. And so if we had Nestle as an example given earlier today, a Nestle deployment of @signs might at the top level have @Nestle itself. And that could be associated with various social media campaigns and apps using that. But we could then associate the top level LEI for Nestle with that @sign. And so it would become an attribute that would be in the key value store of the personal data service, which goes with every @sign. And we've been then working on schema for kind of common data that would be held in that key value store, as well as individually namespace data for each of the applications that are built on the platform.
And I think the @sign stuff is really, really cool, but you can put anything on a SIM. So we have another partner who does blockchain, Smart Axiom. We take tokens from Smart Axiom when they actually build the device. We drive those onto the SIMs in their factory. So it's the first time it boots, we put the token that they provide us on there. And then it sits on a shelf for 6 months or whatever, and then they sell it to Chris. So now we need to put another token on there to say that it's allowed to speak or write to Chris's ledger. So we can do lots of things in there. It's interesting, the Vodafone guys are here, and the differentiator, when we have to try and fight against a behemoth like Vodafone, we have to differentiate because they beat us on price most of the time. But we try and overlay different features, and being able to open up the SIM, being able to make that available to write an LEI on a SIM. Maybe that'd be a really interesting use case. Maybe we could trigger back ends on that. That's sort of the thing we're looking to do. We work with the ATSOM because we really like the way their protocol stroke platform works, because it gives you those 42 patents that we just basically coattail on.
All right, so we've been signaled that we are at the tail end, but before we get there, and because we were late in getting in, I'm gonna take 2 minutes to finish up our session. And that is, what I like to do is give you Harry Potter's magic wand for technology. And I'm gonna start with you, Jimmy. What do you think is going to happen in the industry as pertain to identity and security and IoT?
I think we're at a watershed moment, because security is the belle of the ball when the CEO is being asked on a survey what's important to him, or when you're designing a project, what's the most important thing we need is security. And as soon as budget constraints turn up, the first invite that gets ripped up is security. So I think we're moving away from that, and I think that would be, and that's because of public groundswell of opinion, but also the legislation that's coming through as well.
Chris?
So if the key's going to be keys, then I want to have really secure private keys everywhere. So I'd use my magic wand to get secure elements into even the most basic microcontrollers, along with elliptic curve and post-quantum crypto functions that I can easily access on them.
Great, thank you.
For me, I'd say goodbye to BTLE so that we can start having actual SIMs in devices. And I'd really want to look at harmonization, or more harmonization of standards to include healthcare, because healthcare, unfortunately, is still the behemoth, and it does lag behind.
Amen to that. And with that, thank you very much for your attention.